So while we've been talking cold snaps, snowfalls and energy crisis so far this winter, earlier in the year we were talking floods. Up and down the east coast they were, especially in southeastern Queensland and northern New South Wales. Perhaps most incredibly was the flooding in the Nepean and Hawkesbury River system on Sydney's western and northwestern fringes. They were hit by damaging floods for the second summer in a row. In fact, they were hit again this year while they were still cleaning up from last year's floods. Our colleagues at Sky News Weather have had a good hard look at this, and they're sounding the alarm bell about what could happen next. In a new documentary series called Underwater, Forecast for Disaster, it'll start airing on Sky News Weather this Sunday. The team examines the potentially catastrophic impact on Western Sydney if the historic 1867 Hawkesbury-Nepean flood were to happen again.
I would hate to think what it would look like if we have the 1867 flood now.
I can't think of the carnage that would happen.
It's almost certain that there will be a flood of that size again.
Floods breed more floods. Once you have a flood, the risk of another one is higher.
Absolutely catastrophic conditions.
We will have a civil disaster and it will exceed the capacity of the first responders to rescue people.
The risk right now of a bigger flood is high.
That'll premiere this Sunday, 7 o'clock in the morning on Sky News Weather. It'll be repeated throughout the day, Sky News Weather Channel 601. You can also watch it on Foxtel or stream it on Flash. Let's bring in Tom Saunders, Sky News Weather's Chief Meteorologist. Thanks for joining us, Tom. Why did your team decide to put this together? You must be very worried about the situation that's looming.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. Look, this has been on the radar of the New South Wales government and the SES for decades. However, what we've seen is a period in Australia where drought has really dominated, and as a result, we actually went 30 years, Chris, without seeing either a moderate or a major flood along the Hawkesbury-Nepean River. Now, previously, looking at 200 years worth of data, the longest gap that we had seen was less than 10 years. So it was unprecedented for that 200-year spell to go that long without seeing a flood. Now what have we seen? We've had 3 major floods in just 12 months along the Hawkesbury-Nepean River. Now we think, we've done a lot of research into this, that we have begun what will be a wet spell for Australia that could last right through the decade. So there is a heightened risk of further major flooding over the next few years.
Well, that's the incredible thing. We've seen that flooding in recent years, as you say, but the question is, this is all well below the record flood of 1867, the record back then. Let's have a look at what your documentary makes of that.
I'm standing here on the Nepean River right near the Great Western Highway, and just 15 kilometres upstream is a full Warragamba Dam. In 1867, the water level would have risen 10 metres above my head, and downstream at Windsor, it would have risen 18 metres above my head, but critically 6 metres above the level we saw in March this year.
It's just extraordinary, Tom, the amount of water we're talking about there. What happened in 1867? What would happen now?
So 1867, the water level 6 metres above what we saw earlier this year. Now, we saw pictures on our TV screens a few months ago of water sort of lapping just at the front door of some homes. You add 6 metres onto that, you're not talking about a water level that's up to a rooftop. You're talking metres above a rooftop. That's not flood damage. You're talking about houses being completely washed away. Now, 1867, there was only a few thousand people in that floodplain. 20 people lost their lives. What happened is Richmond, Windsor, Pitttown, they were turned into small islands. That's how high that water level was. Now, you go back to 1867, it was an East Coast low, very similar to the sort of weather system that brings most of the flooding. We don't have a huge amount of data, but the Observatory Hill Weather Station had over 300 millimetres of rain in 6 days. It was a lot of rainfall. Now, what happened in 1867, if that happened today, it's a different story, obviously because of the increased population of the floodplain.
100,000 people, up to 100,000 people in that floodplain now, so much more development. Obviously, it would be catastrophic. And this is why there's been a decades-long argument about increasing the height of Warragamba Dam, not for more water storage, but to mitigate against floods.
Chris, there's a lot of questions. Now, the first one is there the infrastructure in place to get 100,000 people out when back in 1867 there was only a few thousand people? And that's something that we'll explore actually in the series. Can the roads, can the network actually handle taking out nearly 100,000 people? Now, we've actually travelled on these roads. The evacuation roads, they are not the main roads and highways. These are small roads, so we'll go into that. The other big question is the mitigation options, Chris. You've got people saying we should lower the capacity of Warragamba, so use it for flood mitigation. Other people say you build an extension of Warragamba Dam. You increase the height of the wall. Do you spend the money on improving the infrastructure, or do you repopulate people outside? Now, we're going to go into all of those options, but one thing that has happened is, despite decades of reports, nothing has happened. So perhaps more important than finding the right option is just picking an option and going with one of these options.
Cracking, because it takes years to implement. We've been talking about Warragamba Dam and an increase in the height for so long. And this is quite an innovative documentary style you've got here. You're doing it in segments. You'll do a small doco on Sunday, and then each day the next segment. So and they'll be rotated throughout the day, so people will get the full picture, the threat that's looming, and what we ought to be doing to stave it.
4-part series starts part 1 on Sunday. We'll then have part 2 on Monday, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, part 3 and 4, because I just want to say the environment that we've created at the moment in doing nothing for decades, it really is an environment that could lead to a disaster.
Great stuff, Tom. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing it on Sunday.